Hey Ryan, how do I get project-based learning started at my school? I've gotten some form of this question nearly every day for the last decade from engaged educators just like you. So at Magnify Learning, we've created a free download to get you started. Whether you're a superintendent, principal, coach, or teacher, go to whatispbl.com to get started on your project-based learning journey today. Are you ready to bring project-based learning to your school? The PBL Simplified podcast will help equip you for your PBL journey with weekly need-to-knows, engaging interviews, PBL showcases from facilitators in the classroom, and PBL leadership episodes to move you towards a successful implementation of PBL. Because every learner deserves to be a part of an inspiring story, and we see daily that project-based learning helps make this happen. If you want me to answer your PBL need-to-know on the podcast, visit whatispbl.com and click on Ask Ryan to submit your question. Welcome to the PBL Simplified podcast, where we are working to get 51% of schools doing PBL by 2051. 51 by 2051, that's the goal, folks. My name is Ryan Stoyer, and I'm your host of the PBL Simplified podcast. There's also a YouTube series by the same name. Go to pblsimplified.com, or the book is coming out January 2023. You can pre-order it right now at Barnes & Noble or Amazon or wherever books are sold. It's PBL Simplified 6 Steps to Move Project-Based Learning from Idea to Reality. If you're listening to the podcast trying to figure out what project-based learning is for you or your staff, that's exactly what the book is designed to do, and there'll be a book study that goes along with it that guides your staff through the process wherever they're at. Like, we're past the point where it's just innovators trying to create project-based learning experiences. Now we want the early, the late majority, even our laggards to step into PBL somewhere, and that's why I wrote the book. That's why we have the video series and this podcast, so you can find your place or your team's place to step into PBL. Because there are such good outcomes for kids, we want everybody to be able to experience it. We've got a great PBL showcase for you today. We've got Kelly and a couple of our second graders on today, so you're going to want to be able to hear their voice in this too. And they're going to tell you how you can think globally and act locally. They've got this great PBL unit that they've walked through, and some of their outcomes are phenomenal. Not only did they think globally, they acted globally, and they acted locally. It's a great example. But first, our need to know for the day. Our need to know for the day is, how do I bring PBL ideas to my classroom? And we always get questions on this. Do the kids have to come up with the idea? Can a teacher bring it? Can an outside source bring in the idea? And the idea can come from anywhere. The idea that the kids have to come up with the PBL idea on their own is definitely an advanced tactic, right, in PBL. So can they come up with the idea? Yeah, sure they can. Can you, as you hear in this episode, actually, you'll hear that Kelly brought the idea of looking at their water sources locally and globally, but the kids kind of take it in a different direction. So I think that's a great way to look at this. Where does the PBL idea come from? A lot of times it comes from the teacher, and that's okay. I like to say that a lot of times our youth, our learners, they don't know what they care about yet, so we need to bring those things to their attention. And when we do, they buy in. Like, the engagement's there because it's a real-world problem that you're solving together. So you can bring in that PBL idea because you're going to connect it to standards, you're going to have things scaffolded, so you really need to be a part of that process. Now, are there times where your learners come up with that idea? Absolutely. Is it a magical time? Yes, it's a lot of fun. Is that what you're going to do for your first PBL? Maybe not, and that's okay. Maybe not for your 10th, right? They don't all fit like that. So when you start to get into have-tos, I start to cringe just a little bit. The kids do not have to come up with the PBL idea, and you're going to hear a really great progression actually in our episode today, our PBL showcase. So who brings the idea? It's likely well crafted by the facilitator who's looked at the standards that need to be addressed, looked at some real-world problems, looked at some community partners, and then within the sphere of his or her capabilities and comfort level, and the capabilities and comfort level of your learners, are they brand new to PBL? That might kind of adjust your PBL unit a little bit, right? They might not know vocabulary and things yet, so you're going to ease them into that. So try to move away from the have-tos. I think I do that pretty well in the book, in PBL Simplified, where there's a place to start. Like, wherever you're at, there's a place to start. And if you're in an advanced place, Like there's places for you to branch out, right? There's always this growing that we have as facilitators. And as leaders, I think it's really important to watch our language around that and make sure that everybody in your staff has a place to step into the PBL environment. For instance, if you have somebody on, say, the late majority, in the back end of the innovation curve, and they're hesitant about stepping in, can they bring a community partner in for their next unit? Why not? You can have a traditional unit that you've always taught, how you've always taught it, but bring in some authenticity. Bring in a community partner to speak to why this topic's important. That's a relatively easy step. You don't have to mess with the rest of your instructional model. There's a lot of different ways to invite people in. And at this point in the education verse, there are a lot of resources. We have a ton of resources at Magnify Learning. If you go through a training, like all those things are there. So not everybody's innovating in the same way we were 10 years ago. There are a lot of supports for your entire staff, which is why we believe we can get 51% of our schools here in the U.S. And now we're talking to some folks abroad, so we might have to adjust our math here, but we want 50%. Like the majority of schools should be doing project-based learning because there's such good research behind it. And what it does for our struggling learners, giving them context so that they can learn the math and language art skills we want them to learn, but also the employability skills, the opportunities that it gives our learners. Everybody needs to be experiencing PBL in some way. So we're fired up about that goal, and we're going to keep moving forward. But that's the answer to our need to know for today. Where does that PBL idea come from? It can absolutely come from the teacher, and then you can start to arouse the passions that your learners have and get them to understand what it is they care about and how they can influence the world. Let's jump into our PBL showcase. We're going to talk to Kelly and her second graders, and you're going to love hearing that learner voice in this episode. And they're going to tell you all about their PBL unit, what they learned, and why you should jump into project-based learning. Here's Kelly. Okay, PBL Simplified audience, you have a treat today. For our PBL showcase today, we've got teacher Kelly, but we also have learners, Rainey and Julian, with us. So we're going to hear about this PBL unit from the facilitator point of view and the learner point of view. And we always love having learner voices on this podcast. So super excited today. Kelly, why don't you jump in first and then tell us a little bit about your PBL unit and kind of your guys' context. And then we'll get Rainey and Julian on and we'll get to hear from them.
Okay, awesome. So my name is Kelly Machegas, and I teach at Unionville Elementary. It's part of the Monroe County Community School Corporation here in Bloomington, Indiana. I have my sweet friends, Rainey Nelson and Julian Parks, with me today. They're two of the students that participated in this PBL project that we're going to talk about today. The project itself is called Save Water, Secure the Future, and it was created for second graders. So my driving question was, what can students do to conserve water, make it more accessible, and prevent pollutants from entering our waterways? So I want to tell you a little bit about my own PBL journey. I started about 3 years ago with Magnify Learning. I actually was selected through our school system to be what's called a STEM fellow. And through that journey, we learned about STEM education. We learned about computers. We learned about 21st century skills. And then Magnify Learning taught us all about project-based learning. The first time that I went, I was very intimidated, but also excited. So I went for a 3-day training. All sorts of things were coming at me. And after I left the first day, I thought, oh my goodness, what did I get into? But when I went back the second day, Magnify Learning was so good about just working with us. They showed examples and they were just basically holding our hand the entire way. And after I left that 3-day training, I was so excited and determined to make PBL work in my classroom because I knew students would absolutely love it. And so that's where my journey started. Well, that was before COVID. I feel like everything is before COVID.
Yeah, you put that little asterisk in there, a little before COVID asterisk.
Exactly. So I created the project prior to COVID, the fall of, I guess it would have been the fall before COVID actually started happening. So I created this project around our school pond. And so I need to tell you a little bit about our school so they can understand why I chose this. Our school sits on 18 acres. It's in a rural community. We also have lots of ground around our school where kids can play. We have native gardens, just different sorts of things. We have trails the kids can walk on as well. So we have a large pond in the front of the school. And I noticed that runoff was coming from the parking lot and going straight into our pond. And so I wanted to come up with some sort of PBL that would prevent that from happening. And so I thought maybe we could plant some plants or something. I just sort of had an idea. I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. So we started out that year. We started learning about watersheds and the water cycle. I didn't realize that was going to be 2 years later, basically. So the cool thing was I got this class that I had last year, and they were amazing students. And they were so excited to do project-based learning. And so we started over. And so again, because they're second graders, you have to front load a little bit of the information because, some of these topics are pretty big topics, things that you would assume maybe a middle schooler or maybe a sixth grader or so would learn about watersheds and, the water cycle, I suppose, isn't that difficult, but just, native plants, how to prevent erosion, things like that. And so we did a lot of front loading, learning about those things. And then we started the PBL. Well, as we were learning, one of the other things I want to tell you about is that our school has a unique vision for learning that we call Earth. We created it here at our school. Some teachers sat down together and we created this thing called Earth. And so each letter stands for a different thing. E is for Earth, A is for art, R is for resources, T is for technology, and H is for health. And so everything we do, we try to connect it to those letters. And so as I was thinking about the PBL, I really wanted it to be connected to that. We also have another component. Each grade level is assigned a continent to study for the entire year. And so second grade, our continent was Africa. And so I wanted to connect the PBL to Africa. So I found a book just randomly. I was just reading, searching and researching one evening, and I came across this book. And the book is called The Water Princess. Ray wants to show it to you.
Perfect.
Water Princess. And in the book, the girl, her name is Georgie, she had to walk to get water. They didn't have any water in their country of Burkina Faso. And so she had to walk every day to get water. Because they were walking, they didn't get to go to school, the girls. And the boys did, but the girls didn't. Well, after I read this book, the girls in my class were just appalled that that could happen. All of the kids were appalled that they didn't have water. They just didn't understand how that could be, because we even talked about how do we get water? And of course, they're like, well, you turn on the faucet. Like, they just think it's this magical process. And so we did a lot of talking about that. Well, because they were so passionate about this book, I thought, I know what my entry event is going to be. So I went home. I gathered up every bucket that was around my house, around our school. I asked people at school for buckets, and I found buckets of various sizes, from a 5-gallon bucket all the way down to like a little, potato salad bucket. And I brought them to school, and I put them all around the classroom. And I told the kids, we're going to go on a walk today. We're going to get our own water. And so they chose their bucket and they walked to the pond with the bucket empty. Of course, that was super fun because we're just walking along through this beautiful woods. You want to tell something, maybe? Go ahead.
And then when we came back kind of like a halfway point, because it was a long way to carry. Like, some people had giant buckets. And then there was this one student in our class named Huxley. He was kind of a goofer, and he shoved it on his head.
Oh.
And like, we had masks on there, so his mask was soaked. His whole body was soaked. It was serious.
So as she said, we did go to the pond. Each student filled up their bucket. I didn't tell them how much water to put in. I just said, imagine that you're bringing water back for the day. And so they filled it up. Some had it very full and very heavy, and some had just a bit in there. So we started walking back, and the trail back to our school is not flat. So they were walking uphill, and it was sort of treacherous, actually. And so the kids were laughing and giggling at first. And after about maybe 100 yards, I think they started to realize, like, this is serious. And so about maybe halfway back, we stopped and we put the water buckets down because, of course, I didn't want them to get hurt carrying water. And so we stopped and we just talked about what that would feel like. And I think in that moment, every single one of us was changed, because we realized, I mean, obviously we're not doing that every day, so we're not having the exact same feeling that they are, but right. We could imagine what that might feel like to have to do that every single day. And I think that at that point, it kind of enraged the kids, like, we've got to do something about this because it's not fair. And so my project idea for planting plants and doing that sort of thing sort of took a turn and we added on this other component. When we got back, the kids were like, we need to help this person and what can we do? And so I kind of thought about that for a while and I thought, I don't know what we can do. And so I approached my principal. I did a little research on the book and found out that Georgie is a real person and she has a foundation. And so she is now a supermodel in New York. She's grown up and she spends her time with her money that she gets working, putting it back into our country to build wells. And so I thought, oh, maybe we could do that. So I asked my principal about it. And she said, I don't know, how much would that cost? And I said, well, $10,000. And she laughed and she said, oh my, that's a lot of money. I don't know if you could raise that much. And I said, well, could we try? And she said, well, sure, you can try. She's very adventurous too. And she said, sure, you could try. And she said, but don't be disappointed if you don't get there. Well, these kids started a fundraising project. They learned how to fundraise. We partnered with the Georgie Bodiel Foundation. We actually had a Zoom call with Georgie. She was going to come to our school, but she couldn't because of COVID. But she actually Zoom called with us, which was incredible.
It was very fun. I was so proud of us because we were like the class that Zoom called someone that did all that cool stuff. I felt so proud.
Yeah, and isn't it cool that she's done all that cool stuff and she thought your classroom was important enough to Zoom into?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was really neat. She actually talked to the kids about her whole journey and then let the kids ask questions. And it was kind of funny. One of the kids asked the question, when do you start carrying water? At what age? And she actually giggled and she said, as soon as you can start walking, you carry water. And she said the vessel starts very small, as a toddler carrying water. And as they grow older, the vessel gets bigger. And that was very impactful, not only on the kids, but also on the adults that were in the room watching the Zoom call. It was like, wow, this is serious. And they asked some funny questions. They wanted to know, does it hurt your head when you're carrying water? And she actually had a little tool that she said they used to put on their heads. Do you remember what that was, Julian?
It's like a rolled up scarf.
Yeah, a little
Okay.
rolled up piece of cloth that they would put on their head that they made special that would protect their heads. And I think the kids still remember those things now. It was ingrained in us because we were talking to a real human. And she couldn't have been more nice. I mean, she was very grateful for what the kids were doing. And so that really sparked us to, hey, we have to really make this project happen. And so we've kind of had multiple things happening all at once. We were growing seeds in the winter because we knew we were going to plant those seeds to help our pond. And then we were also trying to fundraise. And so the students made a video. We did some research on how to conserve water and why you should conserve it. They made a video and sent it to our principal. It was during COVID, so it wasn't like we couldn't see her, but we wanted to make the video. She was super busy. And so they made the video themselves and talked to her about why they wanted to do this. They also made a video and sent it to our PTO because we needed someone to collect the money for us. And so after we did that, they both gave us the green light and said, go for it. So these kids started talking to people. They talked to everyone in our school. They went during the lunch periods and they gave their presentations again on water and why we were doing this. They started talking to their grandparents, their cousins, their aunts, their uncles, their brothers and sisters, and donations started coming in. And so every single day we would start the day with the GoFundMe page up and we would look, okay, today we have $200, you guys, and wow, that's a lot. The next day we have 400 or 600, or, we got over the 1,000 mark. It was like, wow, we got to 1,000. Well, 10,000 is still far away. Within a little over 2 weeks, these kids raised all of the money. And I say these kids because I didn't do a thing. I didn't ask people for money. I talked to people, this is a full project we're doing, but I did not ask anyone for money. And so they raised over $10,000.
Wow.
In about 2.5 weeks. And I think they could have raised more, but we stopped after that 2-week period because that's the amount we needed for the well. And so starting in November of this year, they will start digging the well, and that well will be dedicated to the students in room 105 from last year. So that was really cool. And we were so proud of that.
Yeah, that's an amazing accomplishment. So let's hear from Julian maybe. Like, Julian, how did you tell people about the well, and what was it like seeing that the fundraising dollars come in?
it was pretty awesome seeing all the dollars come in. And I told my parents about what we were doing, and then they started sending all these messages to my family members.
We even got money from little brothers and little sisters piggy banks. You could see the donations, and sometimes they were anonymous, but sometimes it would say the person's name. And there were often times where we would have a donation of $2.31. Where did that come from? Oh, that was, maybe Julian's little sister or Reedy's little brother. It was really neat that everybody in the family was really becoming involved in what we were doing. So it was just incredible. But again, that was only part of the PBL. We still wanted to do the part for our school. We wanted to connect it to our school. So we did partner with another person. His name is Shane Gibson. And he, at the time, was part of Sycamore Land Trust, which is a nonprofit that protects land here in Indiana. And he came out and he talked with the kids about runoff, and he did some experiments and different things with them. And he talked to them about possible ideas for what we could do for the trail. And that's where the idea for growing the seeds and creating our own plants that could soak up water. We actually researched different plants and found the ones that would work best. And so we grew them over the winter. And then in the spring, we went out and we planted those. And so before we could even plant them, what did we do with the trail?
We
Remember?
fixed it.
Yeah, we fixed it. We had to relocate it, didn't we, Julie?
Yeah, it was fun. It was
So the runout problem, part of the problem was where the trail was located. And so the kids used their muscles to physically relocate the trail. They were carrying logs. At one point, we had about maybe 15 kids carrying a huge, not a log, but basically a tree to put down because we wanted to have some barriers around. And they worked just tirelessly to do that all by themselves. It was just kid labor.
And then we did mulch.
Then we mulched the trail. We did about, I think 10 yards of mulch. The kids took it from the top of a hill all the way down the hill and spread it on the trail.
And that day I went home and took a nap.
Me too, Julian. But it was really neat. Every single kid in our class was participating. They were so excited. And so once we relocated the trail, then we put the plants in. And just this year, you can see the plants coming up and it looks completely different. You can't even tell that the old trail was there. And so we solved two problems at once. We helped someone globally, but we also solved the problem here at our school, which made it really, really neat.
Yeah. So thinking globally, acting locally, and you acted globally too, right? And putting a well in as well. So sounds like a ton of work for second graders and some really, really neat stuff. I know we've got some listeners that are asking, this is amazing work. How do I get this to fit into what I normally do as a teacher? Or maybe even hearing from Rainey and Julie, like what'd your classroom time look like when you weren't hauling logs or mulch or water? What were you guys doing in the classroom?
We were still doing like normal classroom stuff. But we were also like reading books about Africa and watching videos about water in Africa.
Yeah. So the stuff you're doing in the classroom related to the work you're doing outside. And my guess would be what happens is then as you're reading some of those books, they're usually above your level, typically, right? Or what were you reading?
We were reading mostly picture books.
Okay.
They were good books. They were, there was another one about, it was called Princess Gigi Water is Here. It was the second.
Princess Gigi is some of my favorites. I really like Princess Gigi.
She's an amazing person. She really is. She was incredible. We did a lot of just talking about how it would feel to not have water and what other places in the world don't have water, because there are places in the United States that have water scarcity. So we did a lot of talking about that. We had a lot of good conversations. I know you were asking Julian about reading books about their level, and I have a story about another student in our class who was really struggling with learning how to read. She, obviously she really wasn't She's a second grader, so she knew how to read, but her skills weren't as developed yet, let's say. And she was also very, very shy and did not like to be the center of attention at all. And so throughout the year, we were reading, we were doing presentations, and we're doing all sorts of research and writing and things like that. Well, as we were doing that, her skills were developing before she even realized it. And so we do a thing in our school called DRA, where we check students' reading levels, and we want all students to be at level 40. Well, at the beginning of the year, she was at about a 24. And so she had some room to grow. And so she was working on reading this whole time without even realizing it. And then maybe mid-year or somewhere around January, February, she reached level 40. And so we like to celebrate in our class. And so I brought her to the front of the room to celebrate because she had reached level 40. And the kids were so sweet and so excited. We were raising the roof. That's where you put your hands above your head and everyone's woo, 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 making noises. And so she was at first shy to come up, and she got in front of the room. And one of the students, we had been doing math before that, and one of the students, I think it might have even been Julian, had a marker board, and they wrote on the marker board something like, "We're so proud of you," or I think it was too. And so they held that board up, and she saw that board and she just lit up. Well, because she was so excited and it was such a sweet message, other kids started writing messages to her too. And so here she was standing in front of the room, so proud because she had reached a goal, but also her classmates were so proud of her too. And it just gave her the strength and the boost to not be so shy anymore. And so as we were doing the fundraiser, she actually made a video on her own in her bedroom one night with her iPad, and she asked her parents, "Hey, could you put this video on your Facebook feed?" She wanted to tell people about water, and she wanted to tell them why it's important to conserve it. And it was really touching to me as a teacher. It was like, wow, this really is a powerful thing to do. And the funny thing was, it was my favorite year of teaching. This is my 28th year this year, and it's my most favorite year that I ever had. Truly, they were an incredible group of kids, which helped, but we learned so much, and it really impacted our hearts, not just our minds, but our hearts. And it was incredible. It gives me goosebumps. Thank you.
Isn't that so good, Kelly? And we hear that with project-based learning, like maybe we just call it goosebump teaching, right? Like this is the work that we want to do as educators, right? And you're doing it, you're seeing kids light up. And really, I also hear in your story and from Rainey and Julian, just the culture that's in your classroom. And they can do that because they have this common goal that they're all passionate about, they're all moving towards. And you can hear the collaboration happening, the encouragement happening. And it sounds like a really, really special thing.
Yeah. And it's not something you just do with quote unquote smart kids. I mean,
so good. Yeah.
Took ownership. There was something for everyone to do. And as they were doing these things, learning was happening before their eyes. Like they didn't realize it. Kids who didn't really like to pick up books in the beginning were picking up all sorts of books because they wanted to know. There was a reason for reading.
Yeah, it's so good.
Easy.
Well, you know what? It's neat because I've been talking about research on the podcast quite a bit. And the Lucas Foundation came up with this research around, what do you do when kids are struggling with reading or math? And a lot of times we do skill and drill. And the problem with that is they don't have the context for the learning, right? Like they don't know why they're reading. So what our listeners are hearing in your story is that they've got the context of Africa wrapped all around this. They're learning about global wells. They're learning about local water runoff. So every book that they're reading has all of this additional context and community partners that are zooming in, all these different context pieces to help them understand what they're reading. And as you saw, like scores go up, right? Like the reading ability goes up because you have the context. So it's so neat to see. I mean, the research was done really well, but it's also neat to just bring the research in real life onto the podcast, right? Like I can see it and hear it in your story. We could probably talk about this for another hour and a half because I'm fired up, but we're going to kind of move towards some concluding ideas. So we're going to talk about project-based learning a little bit, just the process of that. And Rainey and Julie might not know any different. It's just what they did, but there are some schools or some students that don't get to do project-based learning. What would you say to those kids of why they should or why they would want to be in project-based learning?
It's funner to be in project-based learning, and even if you don't know it, you are learning a lot. And having fun at the same time, it's a lot.
It's
a lot.
it's okay to have fun and learn, isn't it? So the people that listen to our podcast, a lot of times I don't think it's learners, but it's principals and teachers, especially this episode teachers listen to. So I'd like to hear, again, maybe from Julian this time, if there's a principal that's not sure about project-based learning, what would you tell that principal?
It's not like just fun, and it's also like a lot of learning.
That's such a great message, because a lot of times we hear about the awesome things that are happening. So, well, what about the learning? So there you go. I think that's exactly what they need to hear. I think you nailed it.
I think what we learned too is that even though they're young, they're, 8 years old, they can do amazing, incredible things. And they learned that they can talk to other adults and get their message out, and adults will listen. And I think that was valuable for me to learn too. I mean, I've always thought that kids were incredible and we could do things, but seeing what they did, it was eye-opening, really.
Yeah, and I love that idea. Like, if you can learn at age 8 that you can do anything and that you're powerful and you have purpose in the world, like, how exciting is that when you're 30? Right? It's like, so
With water especially, I don't think any of us will ever think of water the same again. Every single time I turn on the tap, I think, oh gosh, am I wasting the water? Or, what could I do with this water instead of pouring it out? I could put it on a plant. Or we learned all sorts of things to do with water, didn't we, guys? And so I think we will never be the same.
well, and Rainey and Julian, I'm going to ask you about what your dream job might be here in just a second. But what also happens, I think, Kelly, in this scenario is you guys saw a problem and you solved it. Or we're a part of solving that process, right? Like, it's not completely solved, but you're a part of the process. And what I always hope and what I see is when learners can see a problem and go to solutions, right? Like, I think we've won, right? Like, that's how, right, we're changing the world. And we get fired up here at Magnify Learning about project-based learning. We do think we're changing the world, right? So, because we are, like, if your learners, every time they see a problem, instead of going to complaining, if they go to solutions, the world's just a better place.
It is a better place. I think my mistake in the whole project was not
good.
telling the students that we're doing project-based learning. When I asked Julian and Brady to be on the podcast, and I was
so good.
talking to them about what we were going to talk about, one of the questions was, what do you like about PBL? And I had to explain to them what it was, because
Sure.
I said to them, we're doing project-based learning. We just sort of jumped in, and I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
I think it's great. I mean, at the core, I think project-based learning is just really great teaching. It's authentic. It's helping kids solve real-world problems. So they're learning the academic standards, but also all these other skills about problem-solving, critical thinking, collaboration, how to build culture. So I love sneaky teaching, right? Where it's like, right? It's like when I hear your learners say, hey, it's fun and we're learning, that's great. So I don't really care what you call it,
Yeah,
So
exactly. Well, and kids wanted to come to school. I mean,
That's
generally
right.
speaking, students in our school want to come to school anyway. They're just really good kids. But, there are some people that school is not their jam. But literally, there were kids that I'm sick today and can't come to school. And they were very upset by that, because what was I going to miss that day? And
Yep.
so that's really neat too. It helped attendance. I mean,
Yep.
in a small way, but kids want to come to school. And
it's a big deal, I think. If you're increasing attendance, right, you're increasing my time in a great culture where I'm learning all these different things really all the time. So I think it's a big deal. And it's exactly what school should look like. Kids should be excited to come so they can come do hard things. So
and
go
honestly
ahead, Kelly.
too, we built community with our group. I mean, I think these guys are so close to each other. They love each other, and that makes teaching for the next year easier. The kids are already ready to go, and we don't have any squabbles. We're one big family. We talked about that a lot. Like, we're a family here together, and we're going to solve some problems together, just like a family. So I think they'll take that with them too.
Yeah, so good. So Rainey and Julian, what's your dream job right now? And I'm not locking you in, but what are some dream jobs that you think would be cool to do in the future?
I think it'd be cool to be a veterinarian, like an animal doctor.
Mm-hmm. Why do you think that would be cool?
I really like animals, and I think it'd be cool, like, if they're sick or hurt, to like help them.
That's right. You see a problem, you want to solve it. I love it.
And I think I'd like to be a lawyer because, like equal rights,
Hmm.
like that, like what we learned about, it wasn't fair, it wasn't equal that they didn't have water. I want to be a lawyer so that women can have equal rights and stuff like that.
There you go. Deep thoughts from 8-year-olds and 9-year-olds. And right, we can see the influence happening right there that I see a problem, I'm going to help solve it. Man, such a great conversation today. Thank you, all of you, for being on the podcast today. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you for having us.
All right, PBL Simplified listener, you just heard a PBL showcase from a second grade classroom that raised $10,000 to put a well in because they heard that not everybody has clean water. And then they saw locally that there was a problem with their local water, so they fixed that too. And now looking forward, they want to have careers where they're finding problems and solving them to help people out in the real world. So I hope you can take this. There are a ton of great nuggets in here that you can pull out, listen to it twice, and just pull out a ton of stuff that you can take to your classroom and to your teachers so that you can get out there and engage your learners, tackle boredom, and transform your classrooms.